I'm Jessica Cox and I'm the Marketing Support Manager for the Global Marketing team at Cambridge English Language Assessment. I'd like to tell you more about Cambridge Assessment and what we do. Established 150 years ago, Cambridge Assessment is an international exams group and a not-for-profit organisation. We are a department of Cambridge University comprising 3 exam boards as well as the largest research capability of its kind. We advise governments and NGOs, and we partner industry leaders to deliver the best products and services. On the screen are some facts and figures about Cambridge English Language Assessment. Over 4 million candidates a year in 130 countries take Cambridge English exams. More than 13,500 organisations worldwide recognise our exams. On the map, you can see the countries in which we have exam centres. In fact, there are 2,700 test centres and 36,000 preparation centres around the world. We have staff or representatives in 29 countries. You can see the list on the right. IELTS is jointly owned by British Council, IDP IELTS Australia and Cambridge English Language Assessment. Over 2 million IELTS tests were taken last year, and more than 8,000 organisations recognise IELTS band scores. IELTS truly is the most popular test for higher education and global migration. I'd now like to pass you over to Annie Broadhead, who's going to give you more information about the speaking test.
Thanks, Jessica. I'm Annie Broadhead and I'm a Cambridge Assessment teacher trainer, presenter, test writer and developer and ELT author. In today's webinar, we're going to start by looking at the format of the speaking test briefly. We'll then explore the speaking assessment criteria and what aspects of speaking these cover. We'll have a go at applying different bands of the assessment criteria to candidates' performance. And finally, we'll discuss some ideas that you can use in the classroom with your students. The speaking test lasts between 11 and 14 minutes and has 3 parts. It's always a one-to-one test, so there's one candidate and one examiner. In part 1, candidates are asked general questions about themselves, their interests, family, hometown, etc. In part 2, candidates have to speak for 1 to 2 minutes about a topic they are given. They're given a card with some prompts to help them with ideas, and they have 1 minute to prepare for their talk. After the talk, the examiner asks a question about what they've said. In part 3, the examiner asks the candidate to give their opinions about the topic. By this time, the examiner will have an idea about the level of the candidate and will take this into account, adapting the questions accordingly. Now, let's have a look at some statements about what candidates have to do in different parts of the speaking test. Look at the first statement, A. Can you identify which part is being described? Part 1, 2, or 3? To give your answer, click on the wand that you used earlier on to show us where you are on the world map. Then click on the part 1, part 2 or part 3, which you think is correct. Okay? That's right, this question is from part 3, when candidates discuss different issues and give their opinion. Now look at the second statement, B. Which part is this? Use the wand again to click on the part you think is correct. That's right. Candidates speak for 1 to 2 minutes on a given topic on their own in part 2. Okay, so the last statement, C, is from part 1, when candidates answer questions on familiar everyday topics. If you want to find out more about the different parts of the testing focuses and the testing focuses, look at the Teacher Support website. We'll give you the address later in the session. As you probably know, the candidates taking the IELTS test are from a wide range of levels. The speaking test is designed to be able to evaluate candidates' performance at all these levels. The test moves from general questions about themselves in part 1, for example, which subjects did or do you enjoy studying at school, to the discussion of less familiar topics in part 3, such as what are some of the main advantages of living in the countryside. The change in focus allows the examiner to assess candidates' true level. For example, a candidate at B2 level would be expected to be able to talk about unfamiliar as well as familiar topics, and the ability to do this can be properly assessed in part 1. You will have the chance to look at part 3 from a speaking test in a moment. But first of all, let's look at the criteria which are used to assess the candidates. As you can see from the table, candidates are assessed under 4 criteria: fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, and pronunciation. I'll just give you a minute to read through what each of these criteria means. Okay, we're going to check how well you understand these criteria and what is involved in the assessment by deciding which criterion each of the comments on the slide refers to. Look at the first comment. Uses a range of structures and makes very few mistakes. Do you think this refers to A, fluency and coherence, B, lexical resource, C, grammatical range and accuracy, or D, pronunciation? Choose the letter A, B, C or D by using the poll facility and clicking on the blue letter. So use your poll buttons. Okay, I can see the results. That's right. Most of you chose C, grammatical range and accuracy. Okay, so what about the second statement? Has a wide range of vocabulary which he used appropriately. Is this one A, B, C or D? Choose your answer again using the poll facility. That's right, most of you chose B, lexical resource. So now look at comment 3. Which criterion is this one referring to? Use the poll facility again. Great, that's right, it's D, pronunciation. This means that comment 4, can talk with very little hesitation and links ideas well, is referring to fluency and coherence. Right, let's move on to look at the descriptors at different bands in more detail. As a teacher, it's really important that you understand the bands very well, and can apply them to different levels of performance. This way, you can give your students accurate and effective feedback on how they're doing and how they need to improve. Let's look at some more descriptors for fluency and coherence. Here are 3 more descriptors. Please read them and decide what aspect of fluency and coherence do these descriptors cover. Type your answer in the chat box. Good, thank you. I can see your answers coming through. That's right. These describe how learners use connectives, such as however or in the future, at different levels of performance. The descriptors are taken from bands 5, 6 and 7. Which descriptor, A, B or C, do you think describes band 5? Using the poll buttons, choose either A, B or C. Yeah, so use the poll buttons for this. Great, most of you have chosen C, which is correct. Candidates at this level often don't know a very wide range of connectives and so often repeat themselves, using only but, then, etc. Right, let's think about band 7. Which descriptor, A or B, do you think describes band 7? Choose either A or B from the poll buttons. Great, most of you have chosen B, which is correct. Candidates at band 6 and 7 will have a wider range of discourse markers and connectives. But at band 6, they may not always use them correctly, while at band 7, they'll be able to use them more accurately and to use different connectives to suit what they want to say. Let's look at another area covered by fluency and coherence. Look at these descriptors. Again, they're from different bands, but all describe performance in the same area. What area are they describing? Type your answers in the chat box now. Good, thank you. Lots of answers coming through. And that's right. Most of you are saying coherence or hesitation. These are describing how fluently a candidate speaks and how well their ideas follow on from each other and are developed. Again, the descriptors are taken from bands 5, 6 and 7, but they aren't in the right order. Can you type in the chat box which descriptor, A, B or C, is band 5, which is band 6 and which is band 7? Thank you. Lots of answers coming through. Great. That's right. Most of you are saying A is band 5, C is band 6, and B is band 7. You can see how candidates are expected to speak for longer, maintaining their coherence and reducing their hesitation, self-correction or repetition as their level improves. Here are the full descriptors for fluency and coherence for bands 5, 6 and 7. Read them through quickly from band 5 to band 7 so you can see how the levels progress. You can use your handout here, which includes all the descriptors for all the criteria. I'll just give you a second to read that. Okay, now let's move on to think about how these descriptors relate to what our learners actually say. We're going to watch a candidate from part 2 talking about a well-known person. While you watch, decide which band you think she would get for fluency and coherence. You can use the descriptors on the slide, or you can use your handout which you received before the webinar. You should see the video start in a new box. Please type back in the text chat when the video clip has finished.
Right, Liliana, now I'm going to give you a topic and I'd like you to talk about it for 1 to 2 minutes. Before you talk, you'll have 1 minute to think about what you're going to say. You can make some notes if you wish. Okay. Do you understand?
Yes, I understand.
Right, here's some paper and a pencil for making notes. And here's your topic. I'd like you to describe a well-known person you like or admire.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Okay.
Now remember, you have 1 to 2 minutes for this, so don't worry if I stop you. I'll tell you when your time is up. Can you start speaking now, please?
Okay. The person who I would like to speak is about Gabriel Garcia Marquez. He is a writer, a famous writer. He was a Nobel. He won the Nobel Prize in literature, and he is from the north of Colombia. He's from the coast, and he's very famous because he has written. He's written about every normal or myths about this part of the country that is very exciting and interesting because they have a lot of histories, and he tried to write very to become a funny knowledge. He tried to show how is this part of the world that is very surprising every time, and also they try to show in a good way how is the another part of the world, another part of the country as well, because our country many times we hear that it's dangerous, all of the time we have crimes, but he in this, for example, in 100 years learning, he showed that.
Thank you. Would you like to meet this person?
Yes, I saw him twice.
Thank you.
Actually.
So I can see that most of you are back. Sorry if some of you had some problems with video and audio, but don't worry, because we're going to look at some extracts. Now, what band for fluency and coherence would you give this extract of her talk? Band 5, Band 6 or Band 7? Interesting. Most of you chose Band 5, and you're right. Of course, in the real test, the examiner would award a band based on the performance across the whole of the test, rather than only on one part. Let's have a look at an extract from the clip. From this, we can see some examples of why this could be awarded a band 5. Here are the descriptors at band 5 for fluency and coherence again. You can see an example of repetition. You can see examples of repetition, actually. And also self-correction. She also uses the same discourse markers repeatedly. We can also see an example of an attempt to express a more complex idea, which affects her fluency, and so she has to express this in a different way. So this extract is clearly an example of a band 5 for fluency and coherence. This is what the examiner commented about her fluency and coherence. Remember, this is only one of the criteria. Each criterion is worth 25% and is awarded over the whole test. Let's have a look at another assessment criterion, grammatical range and accuracy. Here's the descriptor for band 6. Take a minute to read it through. So, what are the different aspects of grammar that the descriptor covers? Type your answers in the chat box. We're getting answers like structures, syntax, tenses, mistakes, range and accuracy, tenses again. Yes, that's right. In this criterion, we evaluate whether candidates use simple or complex language structures, as well as how they can adapt these to express their meaning accurately. We also consider how often they make mistakes, and whether these mistakes are with simple or complex structures. Finally, we take into account whether the mistakes that a candidate makes actually affect the listener's ability to understand the meaning. Okay, here's the descriptor from another band. Read this through. Is this descriptor describing a higher band or a lower band? Type your answers in the chat box. Yes, you're all right. This is a lower band, band 5. What are some of the key differences in the descriptor? Type your answers into the chat box. Yes, lots of interesting, good answers here. Yeah, you're right. At band 5, candidates are expected to use basic sentence forms only, and only limited complex structures. Their mistakes may also be expected to affect the listener's ability to understand. Okay, so what would you expect of a band 7 performance? Type any ideas you have into the chat box. Yes, people are saying things like frequent use of complex structures, correct use of complex forms, no mistakes, flexibility. Yeah, some excellent ideas there. Let's have a look at the Band 7 descriptor. At Band 7, we expect a wider range of complex structures, which the candidate should be able to use quite confidently to express their ideas. They should also be able to speak more accurately, although we don't expect them to make no mistakes at all at this level. Now you're going to try applying these bands to a candidate's performance. We're going to watch an extract from Part 3 of an IELTS speaking test. You'll remember that in Part 3, the examiner asks questions to elicit the candidate's opinions related to the topic from Part 2. In this topic, the topic is hobbies. Watch the extract and think about the candidate's grammatical range and accuracy, focusing on the areas we've just identified, simple and complex structures, the frequency of errors, and how these may affect comprehension. Try to allocate a band, Band 5, Band 6 or Band 7, to the candidate's performance. You can use your handout for this, or you can use the descriptors on the screen.
Right, now we've been talking about interests and hobbies. I'd like to discuss with you one or two more general questions related to this. So let's consider first of all current and future hobbies. What do you think are the most popular types of hobby in your country?
Sports and for example football. Football I think is the most popular one.
Why do you think that is?
I think, okay, first football is popular in most places in the world, and I think it's an easy game to play when since you're a kid, and also the media helps, television and the radio.
In what ways?
They always show football on television, and they always any match they always show it on television. Yeah, so that helps, and the news as well as football.
Do you think the popularity of football is likely to continue into the future?
Yes, it will, because kids like football, and most of the kids in my country like football, and they play it, and it's likely that they will play it when they're older, or we will watch it.
So you don't think it might be replaced by something like basketball or rugby?
I think other sports will become more popular, but football still is going to be very popular. Don't know if it's going to replace like being the most popular sport, but other sports are becoming more popular, but football is still the most.
So what band would you award this candidate for his grammatical range and accuracy? Type your answers into the chat box now. That's interesting. Some different answers there. Here's what the examiner said. So he does use a good range of structures and has a high level of accuracy, but he could use more complex structures in order to achieve a higher mark. First of all, think about your own students for a moment. Which area do they have most problems with? Fluency and coherence, lexical resource, grammatical range and accuracy, or pronunciation. Try to choose what you think is the biggest single area that affects your students' performance. We're going to use the polling buttons, so you can only choose one answer. Choose your answer now. Okay, are you using the polling? Oh yes, you are using the polling buttons. Good. That's really interesting. I know it's hard to generalize, and each learner in a class may have different needs. We're going to look at each of these assessment areas in turn and consider some classroom activities. These activities will help your students to develop the speaking skills they need and prepare them for the test. We'll start with fluency and coherence. One way of helping your students to improve the fluency and coherence of their speech is to focus them on the use of discourse markers, connectives, and phrases which will help them to link their ideas. This is particularly important for part 2, where they have to talk for 2 minutes. You can give your students headings, such as indicating a time sequence or adding a point, and then ask them to think of different ways of doing this. For example, they could say, recently, or one more thing I'd like to say is. Alternatively, you can give them a list of headings and discourse markers they could use, and get them to categorize the expressions under the headings. So see how many you can think of, and write your ideas in the chat box. Good, we're getting some examples here. Whereas, add a point, before, after, then, firstly, furthermore. Good. Here are some words you could use. Now, you need to get learners to use these words in their speaking practice, so they get used to including them. You could choose some more interesting markers which would be appropriate for a particular topic. For example, time sequencing if the topic is holidays. Make sure everyone understands and knows how to use the discourse markers first. Then, write them on pieces of paper and distribute them among the students. The students must try to use all of the discourse markers they've been given while they talk about the topic. You could also make some overused discourse markers, such as then, taboo. In other words, if students use them, they lose their turn and must wait until the next topic. Now let's think about improving your students' lexical resource. This covers the range of vocabulary a candidate uses, how accurately they use vocabulary, and also how well they manage paraphrasing when they need it. What kinds of activities do you use in the classroom to help improve your learners' vocabulary, both range and accuracy? Write your answers in the chat box. Word trees, hangman, brainstorming, synonyms, word bubbles, just a minute, crosswords, synonyms again. Yep, thanks. There are lots of really interesting and useful ideas there. Here's another idea you could try. This will help them to prepare for part 3 of the test, where they need to discuss unfamiliar topics. Put students into pairs and give each pair a large piece of paper with a heading on it. For example, education, the environment, music, because they're going to make posters. Make sure the topics are the type that comes up in part 3 to encourage them to think about the vocabulary needed to discuss unfamiliar topics. Give them 2 minutes to write down as many words as they can think of connected to the topic. Verbs, nouns, adjectives. Encourage them to use bilingual dictionaries if they need to. Put the posters up and ask them to check each other's, adding any more words they think of. Check meaning, word class and pronunciation. Give some time to make a note of new words. Next, give each pair one of the topics and ask them to write 5 questions. Give them prompts to show them the type of question that elicits opinions. For example, what do you think about? In your opinion, etc. Finally, put students into groups of 4 so that they can ask another pair their questions. Encourage them to use as many new words as possible in their answers. What other ideas do you have for topics that you could use in the activity I've just described? Write your answers in the chat box. We're getting answers like the internet, sport, travel, health, current affairs, technology, sport. Yeah, excellent. Some great topics there, which would really help students to expand their vocabularies. You could also extend this same activity to focus on several aspects of pronunciation. Examiners evaluate pronunciation on how easy it is to understand the candidate, but also on the range of different pronunciation features that they use. This includes intonation patterns, using sentence stress effectively, and elision, as well as individual sounds and word stress. So, how can you incorporate this into the activity we just looked at? First, when you're looking at the words the students have written on the posters, elicit and mark the word stress on new words. You could also indicate weak or elided sounds and encourage learners to practice these. At this stage, you could also ask students to read out some of the new words and focus on any problems you hear with the pronunciation of individual sounds. After the pairs have written their questions, get them to ask you 1 or 2 and show them how they can use sentence stress and intonation effectively to make their points. For example, in my opinion, it's much better to live in a city because... Put a few examples on the board and drill them. Finally, when your students are answering the questions in their groups, listen and make a note of any pronunciation problems you hear or areas for improvement so that you can focus on them during feedback on the activity. Finally, let's think about helping learners with grammatical range and accuracy. You probably find that your learners make quite a few mistakes when they're speaking, perhaps because they're thinking more about what they're saying rather than how they're saying it. And it's important to remember that fluency and coherence is just as important for the final band as grammatical range and accuracy. So we don't want students to become overly concerned about not making any mistakes. However, this is one of the areas that students need to work on if they want to improve from a band 6 for grammar to a band 7. At band 6, it is expected that a candidate will make mistakes with complex sentences. But for band 7, frequent error-free sentences are expected. Here's a fun activity for raising awareness of error. It's known as Grammar Auction and originally appeared in Grammar Games by Mario Rinvolucri, published by Cambridge University Press. It's Grammar Auction. 1. Make a note of any good language and errors that you hear your students make during a speaking activity. 2. After the speaking activity, write up on the board 10 sentences based on what you've heard, 5 correct and 5 incorrect. You may want to adapt some of the sentences to focus on particular problems or on just one problem. 3. Put the students in pairs. Explain that some of the sentences are grammatically correct and some are not. but don't tell them which ones. Each pair has £50 or any other currency to buy sentences they think are right. Give them 5 minutes to discuss the sentences and decide which ones they want to buy. 4. Conduct the grammar auction by taking one sentence at a time and asking pairs to make their bids. If they are sure a sentence is correct, they will want to bid more for it. But make sure students don't overspend and make a note of who has bought each one and the price it went for. 5. At the end of the auction, go through the sentences with the whole class, eliciting corrections to the wrong ones and clarifying grammar points where necessary. There are lots more practical classroom ideas on the Teacher Support website. This includes detailed lesson plans and materials that are specifically designed with this test in mind. They will help you to identify the skills being assessed and show you how you can help your learners to develop these. We'll give you the address later in the webinar. You can also find a sample video of an IELTS speaking test on the Teacher Support website, together with a guide on how to use the IELTS speaking band descriptors to assess your students' speaking performance, and a sample recording of the IELTS speaking test with marks and commentary. If you'd like to give your students more extensive preparation for the speaking test, there's an online speaking practice which is available to buy from July 2013. In this online practice, your students can experience an examiner asking questions by video, record their answers up to 10 times, compare their recordings with sample answers, share their recordings, and you as their teacher can give them feedback. That's the end of our webinar today. I hope you found it useful. Let's just recap the different things we've looked at. We explored the format of the speaking test briefly, and the range of language candidates can demonstrate. We looked at the speaking assessment criteria, what they cover, and how they change from one band to another. You practiced applying the bands to different levels of performance. And finally, we discussed some ideas that you can use in the classroom with your students. Right, we'll go through some of the questions that have come through. Now, a couple of people have asked about how the IELTS bands, how they relate to other Cambridge exams, for example, Cambridge English First, Cambridge English Preliminary. We found a chart, but you could, if you go to cambridgeenglish.org, you can find this same chart. But for example, on this, I can see it tells us that B1, so that's Cambridge English Preliminary, that would equate to between bands 4 and band 5. Then B2, which is Cambridge English First, would equate to from about 5 to 6.5. That's right. Yeah. So if you go to the cambridgeenglish.org website and you search for CEFR, that's the Common European Reference Framework of Reference for Languages. It's a mouthful. Just look for CEFR. You'll find that chart and you'll be able to equate it.
Great.
Was there anything you wanted to add?
Someone's asked, how long has IELTS been around? Well, it was first introduced in 1989, so next year we'll be celebrating our 25th anniversary.
Big moment. Okay, somebody else has asked about, in the speaking test, about preparing speeches and then using them during the actual examination. Be careful about that, because you have to listen very carefully to the exact question that the examiner is asking you, and you have to answer that. The danger of using a prepared speech is that it may not entirely relate to the question. So be careful about that.
I think, Annie, we've got time for one more question.
Okay, there's another one here about part 2. Somebody's asked, do I have to write notes in part 2? No, you don't have to. Making notes is just an option. Some candidates prefer just to think about what they want to say, whereas others find making notes actually helps them to organise their ideas and it helps them to keep talking during part 2. But that's your option. Okay, well, I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for attending today. We look forward to seeing you at our future webinars. Thanks and goodbye. Bye.